Okay, hello everyone. So what I'm going to talk about today is something I call the fifth safety paradox, and I'll explain what that is. Next one, please. It is based on something that Tim Reason wrote 25 years ago. He wrote a little paper that many people don't know. It's called Safety Paradoxes and Safety Culture. And in it, he mentions 4 paradoxes, but I think he forgot one. And that's why I call it the fifth paradox. So I go through them. The first paradox is safety is defined and measured more by its absence than by its presence. And what he means by that is that whenever something happens, we say, "Oh, there was no safety," but you never hear people say, "Oh, here was a lot of safety." They always say there was no safety here, but you never have situations where people say, "Here there was a lot of safety." So you never see safety, you only see safety when it's not there. Next one. So basically what it says is that if safety is present, then there'll be no accidents. But if safety is absent, then there'll be accidents. The problem is that if you want to manage safety, we cannot manage something that's not there. You can only manage something that is there. And we cannot measure anything that's not there. You can only measure things that are there. You cannot measure things that are not there. So that's the problem with the paradox. Next one. And the second paradox is that he says that whatever we do to protect the system can also lead to a breakdown of the system because it becomes too complex, and maybe it's a cause of accidents. And this is very similar to something that Lisa Bainbridge said in 1983. She wrote a very famous paper called The Irony of Automation. Next one. And here's Lisa Bainbridge. And she wrote this paper in 1987, which is really famous. And she said that he was talking about automation because at that time people said if something is wrong, we just automate it and take the operator out, and then everything is going to work fine. But she pointed out, she said, there are 2 ironies. First of all, the designer can be a source of problems or operating problems. And the second irony is that there are many things designers cannot do, and they just leave them to the operator. So the situation actually gets worse. Next. And the third paradox is that what Jim said, that we try to, in many cases in safety management, you try to limit the variability of human action to minimize error, but we forget that it's the same variability that is useful to adjust to anything unexpected and actually manage. So I see this is identical to something I called Mach's principle. Next one. And this is something that Ernst Mach, Mach is, when you talk about the speed of sound, you measure it in Mach. And that's after Ernst Mach, a very famous Austrian physicist. And I think he also got the Nobel Prize. And he said, and it's in German here, but I also translated, he said in 1905 that knowledge and error flow from the same mental sources. Only success can tell one from the other. So what he means is that when we see something happen, it's only when we judge it afterward, we say this was a failure, this was a success. But what it basically says, we always do things in the same way. And I think we say that in resiliency too. That's what we call performance variability. And we tend to see that as being positive because without that, nothing could be done. And the third paradox is similar to that, because it basically says we try to limit the variability of human action, but we don't understand that this variability actually is very important for what we do. And it reminds me of another famous theorem in psychology. It's called the field of safe travel. This is from 1938. Next. And this is something in traffic psychology in 1938, where Gibson and Crookes wrote a paper called The Field of Safe Travel. And what they said is when people travel in traffic, they look ahead and they look at the other cars and they say, well, I can go this way because I expect that they will do so and so. And we always do that when we drive in traffic. We try to find a way through, and we try to say what will others do. So this is safe for us to do it like this. And but everybody does that. Everybody looks at the others and say, what are they going to do? And so I will do this because that'll be safe because they will not do something unexpected. So next one. So I think we can use the same thing and say we can have a concept called the field of safe work. So I think what we do when we work, we plan what to do because we expect some things to happen and we expect what others will do. And if it works out, then we're safe. If it doesn't work out, then we're unsafe. So I think that's very interesting. Next one. And that leads to what I call the mutual optimism. Everybody says, I do what makes sense to me without thinking about what others do. And everybody says the same. I do what's sensible to me in my situation. And in most cases, it goes well, but every now and then it doesn't. And that's why we need to understand the variability of human performance. Next. And the fourth paradox, I think, is quite interesting because what he says is that he's basically saying the same thing again, that people worry about safety and they have this idea about zero accidents. But again, he says it's unrealistic to go for zero accidents because we cannot predict everything that's going to happen. So there will always be situations we hadn't been prepared for. And that's where the variability of human performance is very helpful. So he basically says this, and I would say the same, zero accidents is nonsense. It's an ideal, but it's an impossible ideal. But people go for it because it sounds very good for business. Next one. So it comes back again to, I think the first paradox is really the most important, about the presence and absence of safety. And it's interesting because when we do in safety, we never try to increase the presence of safety because we don't know what safety is. We always try to increase the absence of safety by preventing and eliminating causes and so on. So next. So I think that's actually the fifth paradox is that we try to reduce the absence of safety instead of increasing the presence of safety. So when we say we want to be more safe, we actually not becoming more safe, but we're becoming less unsafe. And I think that's a paradox too. That's what I call the fifth paradox. So I think we're doing the wrong thing in safety. We're looking at safety and trying to reduce the absence of it instead of trying to increase the presence. Next. So, and if you look at how safety is defined, then you see that there's almost every definition you have of safety is that here's one from the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. They say safety is avoiding injuries and harm to patients. And ICAO say safety is a state in which the risk of harm to persons is reduced to or maintained at or below an acceptable level. So safety is always about avoiding something to happen. It's the absence of harm and absence of accidents. Next one. But this creates a problem for us in science because what we have many models of the absence of safety, but we have no models of the presence of safety. And how can you manage something if you don't have a model of it? So that's what we need to do. Next. So I think what I'm trying to argue is instead of working and trying to reduce something, we should try to increase something. But we cannot increase safety because we don't know what safety is. But we can increase resilience because we know what resilience is. That's my argument. Next. And if you look at how we defined resilience in the beginning of 2004, it was defined as the opposite of brittleness. And we very often saw this curve that if you have low brittleness, then you have more accidents. But I think it doesn't make sense to define resilience as the opposite of something else. You should never define anything by the opposite. You should define it by what it is, not by what it isn't. Next. So if we jump ahead, we have in 2008, we have a different definition of resilience, which is this. This is actually my own, I'm sorry to say. So we define resilience in terms of the ability of a system to function effectively, both under expected and unexpected conditions. And the question is, can we measure this and can we improve this? And the answer is fortunately, yes, we can. So I think what we should do in consequence of recent paradoxes is we should really realize instead of trying to increase the absence of safety, we should work to increase the presence of resilience. And how can we do that? Because I know we have argued about what resilience is, and I know they would like to say resilience is a verb, but I tend to say resilience is an adverb. It's not a verb. It's an adverb. So we should say resilient and not resilience. That's why I think resilient healthcare is better than resilience engineering, because we say it's resilient healthcare. It's an adverb that healthcare should be resilient. I think because we weren't really thinking clearly when we created resilience engineering in 2004, and I think we were sort of influenced by the idea of cognitive systems engineering. I think it's something we can engineer, but resilience is not something you can engineer. And I think we wrote that in the first book also, that resilience is something a system does. It's not something a system has. So next one. So I think what we can do is, and this we don't have resilience, but we have the four potentials. I'll explain them in a moment, in the next slide, I think. Next. So this is also something that's back from 2008. And when you look at the system and how it works, what it should be able to do, it should be able to respond, it should be able to learn, it should be able to monitor, and it should be able to anticipate. Next. And we call them the abilities, and later they were called the four cornerstones of resilience. Now I call them the four systemic potentials. So it's important for any system that's going to survive, it must be able to respond not only to threats but also to opportunities. So when something happens, you should be able to respond to it. Opportunities are very important because then you can do things faster and better, and you should be able to monitor, because if you don't monitor, then everything that happens is a surprise. And I like surprises, but I wouldn't like if everything that happened during a day was a surprise. That's why I monitor and we try to prepare for what's going to happen. It's the same in system performance. And of course, you have to learn, because you cannot always respond in the same way. You have to learn which responses were effective and which were ineffective and change them according to that. And finally, you have to anticipate, because you have to look ahead in the long term and say, what's going to happen in the long term? What's going to happen in a month and half a year? So we can work on these potentials, and there's a system by which you can measure the potentials, and you can work on them, and you can improve them. So I think that's a way ahead. instead of working at safety, we should look at the four potentials, because that's a way to ensure resilience. And there actually is a report about that with this very nice cover here, you see. That was some work I did for Eurocontrol some years ago. And we developed a white paper about it. And in the next slide, you can see the sources of it. Yes. So you see in the bottom, you can see this is where you can get the white paper, and it doesn't cost you anything. It's free. And I've also written about it in my latest book, not my last book. My last book is in the process now of coming out. And I promise you it'll be my last book. I'll never write another book. It's so much work. So my latest book is the one you see here. It's called From Safety to Safely. And there I try to argue what we should do. We should not talk about safety, because we don't manage safety, we manage safely. So a company manages what it does safely. They don't manage the safety of a company. An airline doesn't manage the safety of the airline. They manage their flights, so the flights are safe and comfortable. So all of you, when you travel here to Brazil and travel back, I know the pilots will say when you go on board, safety is our priority. It is the most important thing for us. But of course, that's a lie. The most important thing for them is to make money. And they can only make money if the flights are safe and comfortable and on time and schedule. So we try to manage safely and not safety. You cannot manage safety because safety doesn't exist. You can try and manage safely. So you can use the adverb safely instead of the noun safety. And that's what this book is about. And it also describes how you can do it by describing the four potentials, systemic potentials. So I also have a new website called incrementalsafety.com where you can find all this information. So that's it. So thank you.